As always, disclaimer before I get started. I need to figure out which order the title versus the disclaimer goes in. You'd think I'd have it nailed down by now, but the views expressed here represent mine and mine alone and do not reflect that of my employer or any organization that I'm affiliated with. So, ready, set, engage, episode 13. I listed the sort of 4 topics I want to cover, of course, off to the side, and we'll see how we get through those or what happens. Someone remind me to talk about Myanmar and Burma, if you don't mind. Cool. So reactant psychology. Reactant psychology is this idea that if you tell somebody no, they can't do it, it actually drives somebody to investigate why they can't, or if it's a functional limitation or just sort of a moral dilemma. So when we tell people, often you can see this in like 2-year-olds, and that's why they're known as the terrible twos, because you say, hey, don't go do this thing, and the 2-year-old instantly runs and goes and does that exact thing you just told them not to do, which can be a little bit frustrating, but it's also scientifically proven that people and children often do this. And so there's this experiment where basically 2-year-olds are set up in a room, and in one of the experiments or one of the control situations, there's a 1-foot plexiglass wall, and there's 2 toys, one on this side and one on that side of the toy. With the 1-foot wall, the 2-year-old's actually able to walk up and reach over the wall. So there's not like an actual blocker or limitation to them getting at the toy on the other side. And so when that's the scenario, the 2-year-old will select either toy, and it's sort of 50-50. It's sort of a wash between the two. There's no limit or barrier that's telling them, no, don't do this. But if you put a 2-foot wall in front of that same 2-year-old, then all of a sudden the deference goes to the toy behind the wall. More children will walk around that 2-foot plexiglass wall and play with the other toy because it's effectively off limits. This is hey, Craig, this is what's known as reactant psychology. Okay. So when we talk about drugs, addiction, usage, behavior, often we say, oh no, you can't do that, it's wrong to do that. And then people are like, well, that's interesting, but I have problems with authority, or I don't have to listen to what you say, or anything you can do, I can do better. And so by saying you can't do that or you shouldn't do that, sometimes we often draw people towards the thing that we would prefer them not to do. And so one of the devices that we can use to help other people realize that, hey, it's probably not advisable, or really like my preference would be you don't do that, is instead of saying, hey, don't do that, say, I would prefer that you not do that, but it's totally up to you. It's your choice on whether or not you participate in that. And it causes them to then think about, okay, this is a preference, and that person voiced their preference. And so if I were to follow their preference, I would sort of be doing them a favor, which a lot of times people like to do that favor or help somebody out. It's the idea of reciprocity. And so next time you think, oh, you shouldn't do that or don't do that or whatever, think about if there's another way to frame it. If there's a way to frame it as, hey, I prefer you not do it. If you do, it's okay. It's your choice. But my preference would be that you don't. And see if that starts changing behavior. I wrote implications of Romeo and Juliet. Of course, you guys can't date each other. You can't have love because of that disparity. Then, of course, they were attracted and et cetera. And if you read on Romeo and Juliet and you really focus on the opening chapters, it talks about how infatuated Romeo was with Rosaline, which was an older lady. It was maybe like a cougar or something back then. And so telling him not to be with the other family actually drew him closer to it. Reactant psychology. Cool. Scooby Doo, greatest of all time. So I was sitting there thinking the other day about, I guess about Scooby Doo. I don't even remember how it came into my mind. And I was like, Scooby Doo is pretty interesting, right? For a number of reasons. First of all, like there's this idea that Scooby and Shaggy were frightened of doggone every monster that came around in that damn show, right? Oh my God, it's a monster, we got to run away, right? Which is this idea of the irrational, that monster's going to eat you, that monster's terrifying, that monster's going to do all these things, is this magical, mythical beast, and so we should get the hell out of here, right? And so you'll notice throughout the cartoons that Scooby and Shaggy are always running from the monster, right? Always running from the things that it would do to them. And then you look at the other side of the spectrum, and you've got Fred, Wilma, and Daphne. Yeah, them. And instead of running away, they say, oh, well, we should look for clues. And then they find clues, right? And sometimes it'll be like, there's a swamp monster, and so there's wet footprints, and Scooby and Shaggy are like, oh my God, he's so close, joinkies, or whatever the hell, and they run away. And the other ones are like, oh, cool, there's footprints, these are clues. Now we can start. I think it was, is it Wilma or maybe? Sure, Wilma. Wilma, I don't know. But so looking at that same information, right, the clues, instead of being totally frightened and running away, the other three walked towards the stimulus, right? Walked towards the stimuli, and we're like, hey, this is a clue, cool, let's take and build this into something, try and rationalize what it means or what it implies related to the monster that we're seeking. And then they sort of engaged in that and kept follow those truths or clues, such that then they could build a good sight picture of who their suspect was. And then, of course, at the end of every episode, there was an unmasking, right? So the idea is you can run from your fear, which is totally rational. That's exactly what Scooby and Shaggy did. It's totally all right to just get the hell out of there. But if you want to conquer that fear and understand sort of the underlying premise of what's taking place or why you're afraid of that, then you can take the same facts that caused you to be afraid and look at those to try and understand those facts and how they inform what might be going on. And so they actually conquered their fear, engaged it head on, conquered their fear, and then they'd solve the mystery. And then, of course, the guy at the end would be like, I would have got away with it too if it weren't for you pesky kids and that stupid dog, or however they framed it, which is also fascinating, right? So think about the mix of personalities you have there, right? You have these archetypical figures that are represented in a cartoon, and basically you've got like a stoner, like, you know, Shaggy's a stoner. Like, I don't know if you knew this. Newsflash. Shaggy's kind of a stoner. He's always like, all right, man, you know, cool, you know, dogs eating fucking Scooby snacks. And then you've got a jock, right? And then you've got a nerd, and then you got a cheerleader, and they all sort of come together, right? But there's another sort of X factor to this, right? So you've got these paradigms that exist, or these archetypes of personalities that we often see, especially in like the high school age or whatever, where there's sort of these archetypes that people identify with, and then sort of that has a lot of bearing on the friends groups or the peer group that you associate with. And then there's Scooby. And well, Scooby isn't really any of those archetypes. He sort of gets along pretty well with the stoner, but at the same time, like he's not the same size, shape, I would assume age, maybe intelligence, talking style, etc., right? But he's still able to get along with them. So right now we're focusing so much about diversity. Velma Dinky, there you go. So much about diversity and inclusion and stuff. And there we had this archetype where it just said, it doesn't matter what size, shape, or whatever you are, you can be a part of a team as long as you have a goal that you're pursuing. And that, so you create sort of some sort of superordinate goal. Yeah, my friend brought that up, my friend at work. So superordinate goal, and then they're all marching to that goal, and they all contribute facts, right? And then what Craig just mentioned was Scrappy Doo. What about Scrappy Doo, right? And so my friend at work was like, Scrappy Doo, I hated Scrappy Doo. You know, he was a little jerk. Well, think about it, right? Scrappy Doo, yeah, sure, he had a sort of aggressive or terse personality. He wanted to get in and fight everyone to show his machismo, but he was also the smallest person there. And so it's sort of a don't judge a book by its cover. And also like size, shape, dimensions don't really lead into who you are as a person. And so he always did the like, let me at him. But at the same time, he was sort of this small, possibly even timid person or personality, I guess would be a better way to frame it. So yeah, I thought it was a fascinating sort of thought to walk through, and just how much it showed different archetypes and all of them working together towards a common goal, which is a really beautiful thing to realize. So we'll come back to superordinate goal. My next thing in my notes was magic shows. And so in the last episode, we talked about hypnosis and how hypnosis was a rapid building of a value system that allows you to then modify behavior or drive people to gravitate to a behavior that is now part or associated with their value system that they have. Magic is a very fascinating phenomenon because when you think about it, I like Scooby Doo better. When you think about it, a magic show is basically just hypnosis with a visual take on it, right? And so when you're watching a magic show, they walk out and the first thing they do is like some parlor tricks, and they do some little stuff that catches your eye that makes you that was weird. I don't know how that worked. And then they build and build and build and build. And then at the end, when you've got sort of this value system that says, holy crap, this person can do stuff that I don't understand and it's magic, then they do sort of a big finale event, right? And so you've got these little things that are causing you to start to believe, oh yeah, it's possible he's actually doing something magical, mystical that's unable to be explained with common knowledge. And it sort of builds. And then at the end, they do this great escape, or they do this fancy flying above the Luxor or whatever it is. But so the thing to take away is that when you're watching a magic show, you're actually building a value system. You're building a value system that says, hey, this person is magical, and this person does stuff that just defies all logic or reason that I am aware of, right? Same sort of thing with hypnosis, only hypnosis, like when you go there, it's, hey, this is a master hypnotist and blah, blah, blah. And so like you start out with this idea that this person is an authority figure on some topic. And then from there, you start building a value system and they do the pacing. With a magician, well, now he's a magician, right? And so we granted them a title that says, hey, they are very good at this thing, and thus they are an expert. And so when you show up, you're already starting to build that value system that the magician is an authority figure on that topic, right? And now they do little tricks that your eye has a difficult time in keeping up with. And as it goes, you build more and more trust that they are, in fact, this grand magician. And then at the end, they do their fancy trick. And so the point of that is, again, that hypnosis is real. Hypnosis can be real. It's a phenomenon that exists, and it's based on a value system. And the concept that we have of magic shows are real, and they exist as a phenomenon. That doesn't mean all those people are doing magic. In fact, they're probably doing sleight of hand or doing some sort of trick or nifty thing to cause distraction, and then do something that seems unfathomable unless you understand the dynamics of how they did it, right? And so you're building a value system around magic shows, just the same as you would around hypnosis, just the same as you do around religion or your job or your education or your family or the people that really piss you off or your addictions. All of those are just value systems that create sort of the landscape of who you are. And you can choose to undermine or disrupt any of those, right? Hypnotist, if you say, I don't believe in hypnosis, and everything you do is focused on saying, oh, that guy's full of crap, and here I'm going to figure out how, you won't likely be hypnotized. If a magician, you look at him and you say, oh, he's probably full of crap, let me look and investigate how the tricks are done, you can probably find all sorts of YouTube videos that show you exactly how that sleight of hand or that visual sort of disruption or distraction works. And so magic is a phenomenon, a value system that you can build within a 30-minute or an hour-long session, or however long the magician is out there doing his thing. When you take that and you realize how fast you're able to build that, that's how fast you can decide to change any value system in your life. The problem will always be you have created sufficient facts to create whatever value system you had. And so the longer you've believed in your value system, the more difficult it will be to reassess all those facts and say, no, this is actually what I should have been doing, or this is where I should focus my efforts. So value systems aren't right or wrong. They're just a schema or sort of a framework with which we understand the world around us. To understand a schema in sort of a visual representation, you could look at the, what is it called? the tree of life or tree of animals or whatever. And so you've got the animal kingdom, and then it branches down, and then at the bottom you got Homo erectus. Homo is your genus, or erectus is your species. Homo sapien, same sort of thing. There's Homo is like the genus that has a bunch of primates. So you can see that, and basically there's 7 layers to that schema. So then you can look back and say, oh yeah, animal, and underneath that is jellyfish, but it's way over here on the left side. That's what a schema looks like. It's just a framework with which to interpret the world around you. So we learn in that way. That's why we believe in magic. That's why we believe in hypnosis. That's why we believe in religion. To change that, you have to sort of take a conscious effort and say, this is what I know. Let me see if I can find facts or reinterpret facts to point in a different direction. And sometimes that can be incredibly challenging, right? And that is a good way to segue into control and changing the world. So I actually posted, what did I post? Posted something about a Kobayashi Maru, which is an unbeatable scenario in Star Trek, and this idea that, you know, some things are just incredibly complex, and so you can't beat them. But in Star Trek, I believe it was Captain Kirk. What was the Star Trek movie that was just like 8 years ago? Basically, he beat the Kobayashi Maru, and he beat it by saying, okay, it's an unbeatable scenario. And so instead of studying the scenario, he studied the person that invented the scenario and then figured out a way to kind of cheat the system or work around the system with limitations that were in place based on the knowledge and the personality of the person that created it. So it wasn't that it was completely unbeatable. In fact, there was a way to beat it, but in order to beat it, he had to take a different perspective instead of just like getting in the spirit of here's the win and loss of that game. And so I think that same sort of idea of not everything is win and loss, but there may be smaller wins and smaller goals within that, is a way to start looking at how to fix the world, right? How to change the value system of the world. And so I posted the Kobayashi Maru. My friend says, hey, I've got a video that I talk about on my timeline. You should watch it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to hear you focus on it. Sorry, drop down the side. Wait for it, Star Trek 2009. Yeah, exactly. So I looked at the video, and I didn't watch it, but I definitely read about it a little bit. And it was called I believe it's The Killing Fields of Myanmar, and it came out earlier this month. It has to do with, so there's some frightening stuff in it. I think it's on PBS. I could probably find the link if people are interested. But the point of it is that it's a very powerful piece, right? It's a very powerful narrative of how there is this ethnic cleansing that's going on in Myanmar, and the world should go in and stop it, right? Which is basically what I've talked about before of here's these conflicting value systems, and this one decides that it needs to exterminate this one, and if it wins, then it's the winner. So you've got those, and then if you get a superpower, right, the UN or the US, to decide that their value system is more than this value system, and they exterminate this value system, then the one at the bottom then gets relieved, and then the value system sort of wins by proxy, right? And so it's this really frightening thing. It's really how war works, in that you decide that your values are right, the other person's are wrong, and there's so much differentiation between those value systems that the only logical outcome is just to exterminate that other value system, be the winner, and then keep marching forward, which is frightening, and it should be frightening to us all. So the video is called The Killing Fields in Myanmar, and it has to do with a province called Rohingya, which is on the western border of Myanmar. Myanmar, by the way, is also sometimes known as Burma. And if you look at the political climate of that region, basically up until 2011, they were a heavy authoritarian, militaristic government that oppressed the people, suppressed any ideas that differentiated from the government. They were sort of strong-handed, right? So within the last 7 years, they started a new governmental body or a new governmental system. Okay, and so the western border of that is what's known as Rohingya, And the population there is basically a Muslim population. I think it's about 1.1 million people. History is unfortunately written by the winner of wars, which should be frightening again, because it's their value system that is now told throughout the history books as being righteous or right, when in reality life is right, and resolution of conflict without war and killing would probably be a better outcome. So Rohingya is the western border of Myanmar and Burma. And this video came out and it says, well, the government is Buddhist, by the way. So you have Muslims on the border. You have a majority of Buddhists as the sort of, I guess, ruling class or just majority of the country. And they take up probably 3/4 or more of the country. The Rohingya province on the western border has basically filled up over the last 50 or 60 years with a high Muslim population. Not right or wrong, those are just sort of the factual premises of the conflict that's going on. And so the current conflict is the government has stepped in, right? This Buddhist government has stepped in, and they've declared sort of martial law in the province. They have a curfew set up, and they're killing people, and it says they're raping, murdering, and killing innocent children and so on. And many people get upset when you talk about killing children and you killing women. Excuse me, and especially rape. Historically, those paradigms were somewhat normal in war. Like rewind back before World War II, probably actually maybe as recent as the Geneva Conference, or Geneva Convention, which I think was in the 1950s after World War II. But so those were frightening and realistic paradigms of war. Basically, you would take over a population and then you would loot their treasures and their riches, and then do the other scary stuff, egregious stuff. So you have these two sides, okay? The side of the Rohingya, the Muslim population in Myanmar, has created a documentary that shows the atrocities of the government. And so if you read the news lately, all of it will be like, the UK is reconsidering the 100 million pounds they give to Myanmar every year. The US is strongly recommending that Myanmar reconsider their posturing related to the Rohingya province and all these things. And so I was like, wow, this is frightening stuff, right? Everyone's talking about genocide. Need more rednecks with guns. Absolutely. Well, sort of, James. Ironically, it might be rednecks with guns would be a way to deem one side of the population and then the government as the other side. Who knows? But so this year, the focus is on the government and how atrocious the government is. And so I didn't have to look very far to sort of, one, understand that there were both sides, but two, understand that it's sort of a volatile situation in Burma and Myanmar anyway. And so as I was looking through that, I found a Reddit discussion. God bless Reddit. It has everything on it. And so what they showed was the ARSA, and I wish I remembered, I think it's something Arab Rohingya Salvation Army or something along that line. And basically what it is it's a Muslim group that's somewhat extreme in their beliefs. They're funded by, or they were at some time funded by, Saudi Arabia. And this group of individuals has sort of terrorized the Rohingya province. And so there's records of them going around and beating people with bamboo switches for not attending the mosques and Muslim ceremonies. And so they've sort of created this terrorized province, right? And if you rewind about 3 or 4 years ago, there was an attack by that sect of people, the ARSA, on the Myanmar government. And so there was sort of an escalation of violence since then. I think they killed 9 military personnel or like police personnel in the province that represented the government. Again, like, my value system is right, you guys are wrong. And so I'm going to end your life to show that I'm righteous in my beliefs. And so the thing's been going on for a while. It's not that it just all of a sudden happened over the last month. And there's sort of two sides to the province, unfortunately, or to the conflict. right now it's definitely the minority side that's getting the most attention, but there's definitely two views to it and sort of two understandings. And terrorism is completely frightening. And I feel like terrorists are fucking cowards, to be honest. Yeah, I do. Sorry, I'm not going to back off of that one. Because terrorism is not traditional war. It's not you go out in a field and you kill each other. It's not you meet head on. It's not you go to an area and you designate that as your military base and then you're trying to attack some other military base. Instead, terrorists hide within the populace, which means that the populace somewhat becomes targets vicariously through those people hiding inside that population, which is just absurd, and it really frustrates me. Like that's one of the things where I'm like, that thing frustrates me. I realize it's my value system and me getting frustrated over that, but it's just like, man, I that's upsetting, right? So from that one comes this value system that we're creating, and this value system as being a series of facts or clues that lead to some narrative, and that narrative, becomes our belief structure or our value system, and then we act or execute on that. The premise of war, we've created a value system sufficiently off of the facts we've seen in our surroundings so that we believe that we're right and righteous and the other people at the end of the spectrum are wrong and miserable, and they're going to destroy the world if we don't do something about it, and thus the idea of extermination. And so I think, unfortunately, in that situation, they both have sufficient value systems that are so far extricated from each other that as they clash back together, it's going to be violent. And unfortunately, it's incredibly violent at this point in time. So how do you end war? How do you end this disparity of value systems? How do you decide as a culture and as a world how to get away from this belief that the only logical way to end conflict is to exterminate or assassinate the people that disagree with you? It's a hard fucking question, right? And it's a hard question because of the value system we have as a world culture. And basically our value system as a world culture boils down to something like the person with the most power or the most money makes the rules, and thus they are right. And so if you get the most power, the most money, or the loudest platform, then you win. And winning is good because the world is a meritocracy where the person who wins the most is the best person with the best spirit that does the right thing. Fuck that. Okay? It's none of those things. If all you focus on for your entire life is going straight to the top and that's the only thing you give a shit about, then everything else is meaningless, really. This idea of a meritocracy, it has, wait for it, merit. It's a functional system, but it's never going to save the world. You've got these big pharmaceutical companies and they're like, hey, we found the cure to this and we found the cure to this and we're going to charge you millions of fucking dollars to get it. What good is that? Well, in a meritocracy, they're the winners. They've got the most money and the most power and the most knowledge, right? The loudest voice. But they're not saving the world. They don't give a shit about saving the world because saving the world isn't profitable. Changing the culture of the world is not a profitable thing. Teaching people that you can change your value system is not profitable. But if I tell you I've got an answer, if I tell you, well, if you follow these 5 steps and pay me $5,000 to do it, then I can fix your life. That's profitable. And then I could be winning in the system that we've created, right? Fuck all that. So how do you get away from a meritocracy? How do you get away from this idea that the person with the most power, the loudest voice, the most money is the one that's winning at life, and thus we should all want to be like that person? It's fucking hard. It's fucking hard. Basically, what you have to do is change the focus. So instead of focusing on doing the most, making the most, being seen the most, or recognized the most, you have to focus on how to bring about a population and a community and the people around you. You have to look to build them up and forget about building up yourself. And that's a hard thing to do culturally. Hard thing to do culturally. But it is possible. It's very, very possible to give a shit about the person next to you And guess what? If you start today and you start by saying, you know what, there's trash right there. I know I can pick it up. And I'm going to choose to pick up that piece of trash. And tomorrow you pick up 2 pieces of trash. And the next day you call to check in with a friend who's been having a hard time. And you just say, hey, I wanted to check in on how you're doing and listen to your story. Not, I want to tell you about the greatest thing I did and all these great treasures I have and all this power I have and the magic of all the things I've created. But instead, how are you doing? I want to hear about you, and I want to hear your story. And I want us to focus on your story for once. And now all of a sudden, guess what? You have a conversation that's meaningful to you, and it'll give you so much intrinsic value that you will love your day because you stopped focusing on yourself and you focused on someone else, right? And so if you stop focusing on being the best, brightest, richest, whatever, and you start focusing on the value of a team, you can build the entire team up to drive great things. And that's a beautiful thing, right? My wife posted a thing saying Jamie's trying to save the world again, right? And so there's this, I've got a control key. Shit, where is it? I lost my control key. I got a control key tattooed on my ribs, and so my ribs a little bit messed up, and so it's this weird idea that we don't control anything in life. And while I used to think that was correct, I think I'm going to revise it a little bit, and that is to say we don't control the environment around us. Okay, we can have an influence. We can have a strong influence on the world around us, but we can't control it. What we can control is the way that we perceive the world around us, the story we build about the world around us, and the way we choose to interact with that world. And so we can choose that life is meaningless, life sucks, the world hates me, the world's against me, and we can build a perfectly self-sustained value system with that in mind. Or we can choose that we want to do something better, and we want to have impact in the world around us, and we want to make that our focus. So I just spent 5 days up in Okanagan County. There's flooding there. I wanted to write a whole sit rep, so maybe I'll do a quick sit rep, and then y'all can sort of take from that. In Okanagan County, it's just south of the Canadian border. So Asuyos Lake straddles the border. You've got about half in Washington and half in Canada. And the snow melt is causing those levels to rise. Basically, it was 85 degrees when I got out there Wednesday. So incredibly hot. The snow is melting off incredibly fast. And it's raising the water levels, okay? And so a moderate flood stage for Okinawa is Okanagan, Okinawa, just moved to Japan. Okanagan is 17 to 18 feet. That's a moderate flood stage. 19 foot is considered major flooding. Over the last 100 years, they've had, they showed 5 on the website of 5 floods that are above 19 feet over the last 100 years. In 1972, it was the worst flooding. It was 21.63 feet. In 1943 or 48, I sometimes confuse those two numbers, it was like 1972 or 1908. It was pretty high up there, but not above 20. And then in 2018, it got up to, I believe, 19.63 feet. So 1.5 feet above major flooding. Okay. And so it was up there, it was sustained. And Wednesday, when I deployed out there, it was supposed to get up to 21.2 by Friday, just from the heat and the forecast that was ahead of us. So it was supposed to get a lot worse than what it was. So we set up, Team Rubicon started an operational order that says, hey, we're going to go get involved. We're going to go do shit and try and save the world. And that's what's known as a response. When something's actually going on, actively happening, that's a response, right? And so we're like, okay, let's go. I got out there Wednesday. And when I arrived Wednesday, there was a Department of Natural Resources. They had an incident management team. They probably had 150 people out there. The emergency manager of Okanagan County spun up a management team. And so they had 15 or 20 folks in the sheriff's office that were focusing on the entirety of the emergency in Okanagan County. The Washington Conservation Corps I think they had about 35 or so people out there. And so they were engaged. They helped maintain the fairgrounds for DNR, and then they also had people out in the field supporting them. There were a number of volunteers and lots of people volunteering in. I actually found out there's a state guard, Washington State Guard. Didn't know that was a thing. So a lot of people getting involved, right? And so control. Well, in a disaster, I hate to tell you, but you can't control the weather. And with something as big as the river, I think it was flowing at 32,000 cubic feet per second, like millions of gallons per day. Excuse me. And you can't really control that, not gonna lie. You can help direct its flow and keep it out of areas. And so the DNR was using heavy equipment and working. Army Corps of Engineers was also out there. They had a contingency of like 7 or 8 individuals to help advise DNR on where to put stuff. So you can build dikes and levees. And so their focus was on dikes and levees to help protect critical infrastructure in the area. And they broke it up in 4 divisions. There's Oroville, that's about an hour north of where we're at. Tenasket, about 45 minutes. Riverside, about 15 or 20 minutes. And then Okanagan and Omak, that were right next to where we were staying. We were staying at the fairgrounds, as it were. And so what's fascinating is you had all these disparate organizations. Red Cross was out there. They had shelters set up, and they actually helped us with cots and stuff. So you have all these disparate organizations, and all of them with this idea that, hey, I can save the world, and here's my piece to contribute. And so we went and talked to the emergency manager, and he's like, hey, where do you guys fit in versus where do these guys fit in? And what was fascinating was that it wasn't, we can do anything you guys can do, we can do better. Instead, it's, hey, we can work together, and here's exactly how. And so Team Rubicon tends to focus on sort of private property and the community that's there, right? And so protection of life and property for individuals. DNR was focused on infrastructure. The emergency managers at the Emergency Operations Center, right? The emergency manager of Okanagan County was responsible for overseeing it and acting as a contact point to bring those together. James, you shouldn't pee in the river because that can affect everyone downstream to a small degree. But all these different organizations, instead of coming together and being like, hey, I can do all of this and I'm going to do all this, it's, hey, how can I fit in and how can I help, right? There was a superordinate goal where everyone was driving to the same thing, right? And that was, hey, protection of this community. And we had different views on what was required within that community and how to participate in that. But it wasn't like, I want to take over what you're doing and I want to take over what you're doing and I'm right and rah, rah, rah. Instead, it's, hey, we can come together. And if we come together, here's our target and our goal that we can work for, right? And it was beautiful. It was a ton of fun, right? I had a tremendous opportunity to interact with people that do the biggest wildfires we have in Washington. They're the incident management team for that. People that work with the Department of Corrections. Oh yeah, there were Department of Corrections folks out there filling sandbags. Ability to work with all those people, meet and interact. And then also, as our team got out there, I had the ability to communicate with them, right? To interact with the people on my team and make sure that they were feeling all right, that they were safe, that they had fun, that they felt their needs were met when they were out there, and that they could participate and engage with this goal, right? And don't get me wrong, in Okanagan County, we're not going to save the entire world, but we can make things better for the population that is there, the population that was impacted, and that's an incredibly powerful thing. And so the thing to take away, or I hope you take away from this, isn't that you got to be right all the time. And if you're not right, you're wrong, right? The Ricky Bobby, if you're not first, you're last. That's not always the case. In fact, most times, that's not really the case at all. It may be the story, the narrative, or the frame of reference that you find yourself in, but there's a lot of gray area and a lot of capacity for us to come together from those extremes and realize a goal that's higher than us, right? That's more important than either of our two value systems. And so how do you solve Myanmar and Burma? I don't know. But it probably looks like something about bringing those two groups together for a superordinate goal and agreeing that that goal supersedes their independent value systems. And if they're able to do that, who knows? They may just get away from the bloodshed. Until then, it's probably still stuck in this idea that my ideas, my beliefs are right, yours are wrong from both sides. And the only way to resolve that conflict is through aggression and through assault, murder, and so on. So hopefully the world will start thinking a little bit more about how to create a common goal and make it something achievable, right? It can't be in-world hunger, because I don't think anyone can uniformly and universally describe what hunger is. But you can say like, hey, I want less malnutrition. I want better nutrition and less disease in this area. And those are things that now you have a target that you can go achieve. But until we get to that, well, it's this fuzzy ideal, and then we're stuck in this belief systems. I almost did knife hand, and there's a guy out there, love him, Aaron. He was knife hand and everything, man. It was great. It was my sort of stuff. But so yeah, that's all I got. Reactant psychology. Don't say don't do this. Instead, say, hey, I'd prefer, and here's why. And you're more likely to get people to listen or engage in what your concerns are. Scooby Doo, greatest of all time cartoon. It had clues, it had value systems, it had fear and engaging with fear and overcoming fear. It's just a beautiful concept. It had this idea of diversity and inclusion is that everyone works together for a common goal, right? Magic shows, they're hypnosis. They're just a value system that's acutely built within a half hour or hour. They're a phenomenon that exists, believe it or not. You can look for facts that prove or disprove, and that's totally up to you. It's just a value system. And then, of course, control. We can't control everything that happens around us. We can help mitigate the risks associated with what's going on around us, and we can control our perspective or our interpretation of the facts and phenomena that exist in the world around us. And that's where our control both begins and ends. Creating a superordinate goal allows us to all come together and focus on a target that allows us to drive forward and drive impact in the world and community around us. And I would love for us to focus on that more. And that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching. That's Ready, Set, and Engage, episode 13.